Hello everyone, welcome to Eng Lang Pro's YouTube channel. We're a team of recently graduated VCE students. We've all been through English language. It's a wonderful subject and we're here to help you guys enjoy it and get as much out of this subject as you can. My name's Tori and today I'm going to be helping you guys with a guide of Unit 4 AOS 1 essays. So for me, when I was going through year 12 back in 2022, I always knew that my essay was going to be on Unit 4 just because that was the unit I was most confident with. But looking back, I wish I hadn't restricted myself to that. Unit 3 essays, it's so important that you're able to do them. It could come up in a SAC, or you could open up your exam and go, this topic really speaks to me. I wish I'd done a bit more preparation on Unit 3 and formality sort of essays. So don't restrict yourself. However, I am going to be teaching specifically towards Unit 4 AOS 1. I've got a video out for Unit 4 AOS 2 identity already. So this is kind of just for you to really become super specialized in this topic, and then you can put them all together at the end. So you're a pro at every aspect of the study design by the time you walk in. So let's talk about identity, specifically AOS 1, which is on Australian identity. Every essay, AC, that you come across in your final exam will be on an Australian text or about an Australian topic in contemporary Australian society, they love to say. So you should be learning everything specific to that, or at least if you're talking about international or different forms of English language, it's absolutely relevant, but it needs to be relevant in terms of communicating with Australia. So globalization will result in the Americanization of our language is something you can definitely talk about. So it's not like Australian English is the only relevant English. Absolutely not, far from it. We'll talk about that now. But it is supposed to be the forefront of all of this topic, this area of study. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we've got all the essay topics in a Google Drive for you guys, but let's go through the step by step. And if you've seen the video from before on AOS 2, hopefully it's gone up by now. It's very much the same process. So first of all, let's go through the content study design dot points. So this is Unit 4, AOS 1, the features of standard Australian English and its role in Australian society. So these are all, I'm just going to give some dot points that when I read through these study design key knowledge points, this is what comes to the forefront of my mind. So you guys should take this just as a guide, absolutely not set in stone, but you should take this as a guide as to what you might start with in terms of your research. What are you more interested in finding out about? So the features of standard Australian English and its role in Australian society. The first thing I'm thinking of is overt prestige. Overt and covert prestige are super, super relevant, high yield topics to know in the entirety of Unit 4. So absolutely, please spend some time going through it, understanding the differences between overt, obvious, and covert colored norms between in-groups, out-groups, prestige, all of that jazz. Australian society, so standard Australian English generally has a lot of overt prestige. So I'm thinking, what sort of role does it have in Australian society? Maybe with formal business, and therefore, what about jobs? Is it difficult for example, migrants with ethnolects to get jobs because of accents and non-standard? Never ever say wrong. Non-standard is always the best way to go about it, because as linguists, we need to approach language as descriptivist and not prescriptivist. Language is never wrong. The point of language is to communicate. So there are so many different forms. They're all correct. We use standard or non-standard to describe things that are grammatically sound in terms of the standard English rules and regulations. So when I think of standard Australian English, that's the form of English that has those rules and regulations, the grammar, the specific set, word order, syntax, all of that, and that the effect that that has on society. I'm thinking about things like occupations, and I might go, oh, let me see if I can find a contemporary example of someone who's unable or has talked about the fact that their non-standard English has barred them from being able to get a job, for example. Let me find one now. So I found a paper. This one is Cambridge University and it's a Canadian study. So while it's 100% worth reading for background information, you want to see if you can find something more of an Australian contemporary example. So this one is about accent anxiety, and it's really quite textbook connection link to things like apprehension about negative evaluations from other individuals due to their distinctive speech style. This is to do with attitudes, concerns about rejection from their target language community because of foreign pronunciation. All of that has got to do with this one dot point, which is also in the study design, attitudes within Australian society to different varieties of English, including prescriptivist and descriptivist attitudes. So I would recommend reading that. You can't use it for within Australian society, but it's a great starting point to start building up that knowledge. So I'll put that in there for you guys. Continuing on. So overt prestige is the first thing I'm thinking about in standard Australian English. Then we'll move on to the way in which a variety of identities are conveyed and reflected in Australian texts. So actually a lot of this comes in dot points to come, but think about in unit for Area Study 2, which you guys might have started a little bit on already. Think about the varieties of identities in terms of idiolects, sociolects within Australia. Broad, general, cultivated Australian English accents. I really recommend reading things about the history of Australian English. Because you learn about things like cultural cringe, which is the idea that we used to have like in the 1940s and 50s, where the Australian population at the time, were very proud of, and I'm talking about the Australian population which originally came from England. I'm not talking about Aboriginal people here at all. So the cultural cringe was a movement where Australians would adopt more of an RP, almost British accent, which then made the cultivated accent. And then in response to this, we had the broad accent. Really, really interesting stuff. Please do look it up. All right, how English varies according to culture, including standard Australian English, Aboriginal Australian Englishes, and migrant ethnolects. So super important to have a look at AAE, which is Aboriginal Australian Englishes. Now, there are hundreds of Aboriginal languages, or, becoming less over time as we lose our Aboriginal languages. But with Aboriginal Australian Englishes, there's a huge variety as well. So you're not expected to be able to pick up, what sort of language group originally led to this particular Aboriginal Australian English, but it is worthwhile finding specific examples of something that could be attributed to Aboriginal Australian English. So just like an ethnolect, it's a mix of Aboriginal words, or is used by Aboriginal people just as culture affects language. Same thing will happen with Aboriginal Englishes. So there are certain features that are in different forms of Aboriginal Englishes that are not in standard Australian English that are worth bringing into your exam. Migrant ethnolects, same thing. So things like, they call it like Singlish, for example, which is Singaporean English. This is not the same as an Australian in particular ethnolect. So be careful. It's worth looking up things like Singlish because that's Singaporean English, but English is one of the, actually, I'll just make sure. Official Singapore languages. Malay, Tamil, English, Singaporean Mandarin. Yep. So English is one of the official languages of Singapore, right? So Singlish is not necessarily got anything to do with Australian English. So while it's worth having a look up for maybe some stuff you've actually looked at in Unit 1 and 2, do not get confused between this and an Australian English mix. A lot of the time it's hard to find something that's specifically Australian. But I would recommend, there are TikTokers, there are Instagram accounts that are based in Australia. And so if there's a migrant who's come to Australia, set up a business and is promoting it on their Instagram, and they've got certain accents or words that they are, for example, borrowing from a language that they have at home, then that's a good example. Or an anecdote. So a lot of you guys will have parents who speak English as a second language who are migrants. So you can bring that in, or bring in a friend's mum, whatever they say, or yourself if you speak English as your second language. Or not as well, if you just speak an ethnolecture at home because you've grown up with both languages around the house. Yeah, so moving along, mentioned attitudes, moving on to how English in Australian society is influenced by global contact and modern technologies. So globalization and its effect on English. So I like to talk about the Americanization of our language, and I just Googled this and went to the news tab. So this is from Monash Lens. Is Australian English under threat from the Americans? It's not as simple as you might think. And I will leave you guys to read this. It's from Kate Burridge and Howard Mann, so names that should probably be familiar to you guys by now. The role of language in conveying a perceived national identity. So we've talked about in-group membership. This is about in-group membership as an Australian. So how do we, and I'm guilty of this, when we go overseas, sometimes I make my Australian accent broader because I like to flex that I'm Australian as part of my identity. So think about that when you think about the role of language in conveying your national identity. And meta language, that will come as you go. All right, so moving on to number 2, research and brainstorm, which most of that comes under step 1. These are some of those key ideas that will pop up and will be directly examinable in your essay. So something like in groups and exclusion, there'll be an essay topic about how do accent varieties and lexical choice in Australian English signal in groups and exclude others, or something like that. Or actually, a better way that they'll do it, because they usually just do a statement and ask you to discuss, will be something like Australian English is effective in alienating those who are outside the in-group. Discuss. Something like that. So these are the things you want to look at: prescriptivism and descriptivism under attitudes, what parts of our language are changing, what makes Australian English unique, attitudes towards variety. So with this one, think about what are something like hyperchoristic endings is a good piece of meta language, actually. So hyperchoristic suffixes, which is the shortening plus the IE or O suffix, something like garbo. And I've got an example for that down here. These are examples that I found throughout one of the weekend sessions that we do here at ELP, just on the fly, so they're all up to date. Debate over changing Australian place names. And then here, this one is a Facebook post about garbos running down the street with your bins. Someone's upset about bins for some reason, but they've used garbos, so you can use it as well. Great. So those are the things that you should have a look about, the key themes. And then you've got contemporary examples. This will come as you go as well. So these are some that I found throughout the class when we were teaching this exact topic. This is one, the Australian English Under Threat, that I found just talking to you guys about globalization, and this Cambridge study, which you should read but not quote, or at least you can snowball it, have a look at the references, see if there's anything more relevant to Australia, and quote that instead. Great. So let's have a look at a raw 50 level paragraph on this topic, which was part of the 2018 VCE exam. If we go down to the bottom, so here are the essay topics, and we're going to do this one. Question number 9. Language use can reveal the underlying attitudes of dominant groups to a range of identities and cultures in the contemporary Australian context. So first thing we want to have a look at is, how do we interpret the prompt? So what does dominant groups in particular, what does that mean? Are we talking about just in terms of size of like population, or are we talking in terms of historically oppressors, invaders, colonizers? What are we meaning by dominant groups? underlying attitudes. What are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk about prescriptivism, descriptivism, overt and covert prestige? How does language reveal it? So I like to mind map these, put my essay topic in the middle. This is early in the year or as you go into your essay planning, and just pull out the key terms in the essay prompt and ask yourself, what does it mean language can reveal? Am I talking about linguistic choice? Am I talking about the way someone is talking in terms of phonetics and phonology? What do I mean? And then range of identities. So I'm going to be talking about what sort of identities. Sociolect representing social groups. Am I talking about idiolects with things like values and beliefs being presented in our language choices and then having attitudes towards them? And then cultures as well. So I'm thinking, am I going to be talking about ethnolects? Am I going to be talking about Aboriginal Australian Englishes? And contemporary Australian context, that's going to be in every essay prompt that you do. So it's kind of like a use meta language in your response that you can just ignore because you'll be doing it anyway. Great. So as we go through, I'm going to be highlighting the key ideas presented in this Australian English paragraph. This first sentence here is your topic sentence, basically. It's a very broad opening, and then we'll go a little bit more into detail. But something like this, a broad opening discussing Australian identity and Australian Englishes in a paragraph, is something worth spending a little bit of time constructing and then remembering, because with a little bit of tweaking, it'll fit a lot of your essay topics that you come across in the exam, because any Unit 4 AOS 1 topic will need something like this, a paragraph like this. So, Australian English is a distinct national variety shaped by the country's cultural ideologies of egalitarianism, mateship, and informality. So these are key ideas, because a lot of what we talk about in terms of Australian identity is going to respond back or link back to these ideas that we've just stated as a cultural ideology. So good to get it out of the way first, that it's clear that Australian identity very much promotes and takes pride in mateship, informality, and egalitarianism. The broad, general, and cultivated accent categories serve as linguistic markers of both social attitudes and shifting identity constructs. So I'm going to be talking about accents. This is my lead in to my example. So we like to start with our topic sentence and then a little bit of a lead in before we slap the examiners in the face with a contemporary example, right? Because the topic sentence is very general, and then we're going to give them a little bit of a hint that, hey, I'm about to give you guys a contemporary example. So, but first, we must define in the prompt what my dominant social groups I'm talking about. So this is just a paragraph. In your introduction, you might want to define your dominant social groups, and you should first. But because I'm giving you guys just this paragraph, I've put it in here. Dominant social groups may be categorized differently based on historical contexts. For instance, the cultivated accent was once considered prestigious due to its proximity with the British received pronunciation when colonized Australian society valued its English roots. However, contemporary Australian society increasingly repudiates this view in order to establish its unique identity. So that's our definition that, hey, I'm going to talk about dominant social groups in terms of contemporary Australian society, but I've given you a bit of knowledge that, hey, I do understand that dominant did mean something else at one point. Like, that's the whole point of the broad accent. It was a response to the cultivated accent. Instead of cultural cringe, we now have cultural, what is the opposite of cringe? Challenge? Pride. Cultural pride. We'll go with that. Right. So, this is evident. Bam, we're about to come with an example, all right? So this is evident in public figures like Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, whose general accent is seen in his recent election victory speech, May 2025, which projects relatability and authenticity, aligning with covert Australian norms that reject pretension. So covert Australian norms, we've got here. I want to talk about covert and overt prestige. So I've put that in there. That's meta language as well, ticking the boxes right, left, and center. So I've put in my speech. Now, because it is a speech, it's difficult to put like a source, right? But I've put the month and the year, and that is very easy to find. You can, and like a really, really top student will go through and try and find an IPA or a phonetic example, a phonological example from the speech. But this is enough in terms of mentioning, hey, I looked at the speech, it's a general accent. I'm talking about relatability in the general accent. Now, moving on to a more broad example, which is just lexical choice. We've got lexical features such as diminutives / hyperacoustic shortening / suffixes. You do not put slashes in your essay. This is for you guys to kind of pick and choose as you go. Arvo, servo, and idiomatic expressions, fair go, no worries. Function, I'll put such as. Fair go, no worries. Function referentially as markers of in-group solidarity and cultural identity. And this is where you can put that example of the Facebook Garbo contemporary example. These lexical choices not only reflect uniquely Australian semantic fields, so semantic fields, stuff like fair go, no worries, very Australian idea, but also symbolize shared values of informality and camaraderie. As linguist Felicity Cox observes, the Australian accent has become an emblem of identity rather than class. So I recommend you guys have a look at some linguist quotes and put them in your essay. It's not specifically mentioned in the study design, but as we learn about things like establishing expertise, we know that that's something that you can do in your essay to establish the fact that you are an expert, or at least you have the support of experts in the linguistic field. Finally, thus, AE continues to serve not only a communicative function, but a powerful symbolic role in asserting a national ethos grounded in social equality and inclusivity. Finish it with a really big bang. Now, I'll just make sure. There we go. I've missed something. You need to mention anytime you're shortening anything or using an initialism, you need to define it in the first instance. You would have done this in your introduction, which is why I wasn't here, but as something good to mention. So this is like raw 50 writing. I did not write like this when I was in the exam. You do not need to have your you don't need to have the elevated linguistic. See, I can't even think of something, right? I always had a thesaurus as I went through year 12, and I slowly picked up things like synonyms that I would need. When I wrote this, I googled repudiates for you guys to give you something to build off of. So when you guys start writing, it won't be anything like this. Mine was not like this, but practice, hopefully, we want to give you the best ever so that you guys can get to your best ever. So with that, go forth, enjoy, study up on Australian English, have a look at all these different things that I've mentioned in this video. I hope it's been helpful. All the best and see you next time.